joined us today and has been such a leader on this, is here on the floor now, and we certainly welcome you, and it's a pleasure to be at your side in this struggle.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Kaptur, and thank you for your leadership over the years, and it's a pleasure to work with Peter Fazio as well and other members of the Congress. I am delighted to join with my colleagues today in supporting legislation which would repeal the NAFTA agreement that Congress passed last year. When Congress passed NAFTA last year, we were told that this trade agreement would be a great step forward for both the economy of the United States and the economy of Mexico. We were told that it would be a win-win situation. Unfortunately, 1 year later, it appears to be a lose-lose agreement. Today, up to 50,000 American workers have lost their jobs as a result of NAFTA and have filed for NAFTA trade assistance benefits. The Mexican economy today is staggering, and wages in Mexico are plummeting. Most alarmingly is that in the last few weeks, the U.S. Treasury Department has opened up a $9 billion line of credit in order to shore up the sinking Mexican peso, and they have encouraged U.S. commercial banks to lend additional billions of dollars to shore up the peso, all of which could very well lead to a disaster for the American taxpayer, who ultimately could be asked to pick up the damage. It seems to me that what NAFTA is about is a continuation of a trade policy in this country which has been very unfortunate for the average American worker. Today in this country, and we don't talk about this terribly often, we have a $150 billion trade deficit. With NAFTA, that deficit is becoming worse. I fear that GATT will only accelerate that problem. Economists tell us that for every $1 billion in trade, we create some 20,000 jobs. That means that with a $150 billion trade deficit, we are looking at the loss of 3 million jobs. Second of all, when we look at the economy in America today, there are people who say, well, the economy is doing fine. We are creating new jobs. The point to make is, what kind of new jobs are we creating? What kind of old jobs are we losing? The new jobs that we are creating are, by and large, low-wage, part-time, temporary jobs that often have no benefits at all. The manufacturing jobs that we are losing in agreements like NAFTA are decent-paying jobs that have good benefits. And that process of losing decent-paying manufacturing jobs and replacing them with low-wage, part-time service industry jobs is one of the reasons that the average American worker is seeing a major decline in his or her standard of living. It seems to me that the primary beneficiaries of the NAFTA agreement, and as you will recall, Congresswoman Kaptur, the people who pushed hardest for this agreement will be the major multinational corporations in America who will take our jobs to Mexico, where they can pay people $1 an hour, or today, with the devaluation of the peso, even less. Who are we kidding? Why will large corporations pay American workers $10 an hour, provide decent benefits, have to protect the environment, when they can go to Mexico and get the unfortunate and desperate Mexican workers to work for substandard wages, when they can go to China and hire people in an authoritarian society at 20 cents an hour? I think that it is absolutely appropriate that we in Congress demand the repeal of NAFTA, that we make certain that the American taxpayers are not stuck with a $1 billion bill in trying to shore up the peso, or in protecting American banks, or lending the Mexican government money. And I also think that it is very appropriate that we begin to take a fundamental and hard look at our entire trade policy, which has worked to benefit large corporations, but has worked detrimentally for the needs of the average American worker. So I think that we are doing something that's important. I hope that we will gather more and more support from members of Congress to stand up, to repeal NAFTA, and to reverse our trade policies.
I appreciate the gentleman joining us here today, and your leadership on this throughout our country has just been tremendous, Congressman Sanders, and your people are very lucky to have you as their representative for sure. And I am sure you are as distraught as I am that people like ourselves receive phone calls from the administration, whether it's this administration or the prior administration, anytime we try to question when the big interests are able to get special access at the U.S. Treasury Department or at the Federal Reserve. It's amazing to me how quickly the administration responds. So, for example, if Mattel Corporation or the Big Three or some of the big investment houses stand to lose anything, right away they get invited over to the Fed. They get welcomed. And in fact, we were called by the Treasury Department very concerned about our saying anything about this whole question of the peso bailout here in Congress today. Yet when we tried to call them over a year ago and tried to get them interested and get the administration interested in workers across this country who would lose their jobs, they wouldn't even come over and meet with us. We wanted to put provisions in NAFTA in order to pay the kind of attention that's being paid to the investment community, to the workers of our country, and we couldn't we were given short shrift. In fact, we were not even welcomed into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, those of us who were concerned about what's happening to workers across this country. And yet we know that there's been one factory a day that's closed in this country as a result of NAFTA. We have a list in our office of thousands and thousands and thousands of U.S. workers who are losing their jobs. 50 jobs here in Horsham, Pennsylvania, 41 workers who used to make bridal and bridesmaids gowns. At Alfred Angelo Company, they don't have those jobs anymore. In Bennington, Vermont, your home
Believe
state.
me, that was the Johnson Control Factory in Bennington, Vermont, and that was a very, very painful situation, very serious loss to that community and to the hundreds of workers who were affected. The only word that I want to add to what you're saying, Congresswoman Carter, is as important as it is to document the loss of jobs, there is another process which is going on as well, and that is the lowering of wages of workers whose jobs remain in existence. Because very clearly, when you have a process by which jobs are going to Mexico and China, when workers go in to their employers and they say, we want a decent wage increase, what the employers are saying, hey, you better take a 10% decrease in your wages or we can take your jobs to Mexico or any place else. So this whole process is putting continuous pressure on a decline in real wages in America, and that's an important point to keep reaffirming.
Congressman Ron Klink of Pennsylvania has joined us here today. Such a strong voice for manufacturing and industrial America, and we're just thrilled to have you as a co-sponsor and welcome you here this afternoon.
Well, thank you. If the gentlelady would yield, and the gentleman also, I was very pleased sitting back in my office to hear that you've taken this time to have this discussion. As a relatively new member, just beginning my second term, you both know how hard we all fought and the message that we carried during that year 1993. And we said that these things that have happened were going to happen. I sat on the banking committee and we knew that there were problems with the peso. We knew there were problems with integrating the Mexican banking industry with the United States banking industry. Yet all this was ignored when NAFTA came to the floor and it passed. It became the law of the land. And actually, being rather new at this legislative business, I told those people who live back in my district, in a very blue-collar area around Pittsburgh, you know, I put a lot of my heart and my soul and my sweat and my blood in my first year here into defeating something that I felt was very wrong, not only for the workers of my district, but very wrong for the workers across this nation, and that is this NAFTA agreement. I would very much prefer that I be wrong. I want to be wrong. I want someone to say, it's because you're new, you don't understand trade, Congressman Ron Klink. This is going to work. All of these promises, all of these jobs are going to be created. And you know what? The 160,000 manufacturing jobs that you lost in southwestern Pennsylvania over 2 decades, that whole thing is going to be reversed now because we've passed NAFTA. And we're now going into GATT and the trade policies, the gurus who have run the trade for our country under Republican presidents and Democratic presidents are all right, and we're all wrong. But we'll go back, we'll get educated, and we'll learn later on. It is very painful to me, my fellow members who fought very hard against NAFTA with me, to stand here today. We don't want to say we told you so. We would prefer to be here taking up another issue, enjoying the prosperity, having our workers making a very livable wage, having them be able to have additional free time in the evenings and the weekends to be with their families, creating safe and secure communities. But instead what has happened is all of those people who rush down to Mexico to make investments are now asking the people that live in our districts to bail out the peso, to bail out the investments that they've made in Mexico over the past year because they've lost 40% on their investments. The peso was being propped up before the NAFTA agreement. It was being propped up falsely before this NAFTA agreement was ever secured.
Will the gentleman yield on that point?
I'll yield, and I would love to hear what the
just for a
young lady
second,
has
it
to say.
interested me at what point the government of Mexico decided to devalue the peso. You know, they had their presidential elections in August, so everything was quiet up until August. Then we had the GATT vote here, and that was right after election. We delayed it. Nothing was said. Nobody wanted to upset the apple cart. Then we had the vote on GATT here late in November, and boom, right after that, when everything was set and secure, then the decision was made to devalue the peso. And our government knew for a long time this was coming. The officials over at Treasury and the Fed. So it was all orchestrated at the highest levels, no debate down here, no discussion, and now, as you say, our people have to foot the bill.
Well, if the gentlelady would again yield, I will say that we brought up, and I remember all of us being on the floor during the GATT, that we knew that there were problems. Now, we've got small staffs that deal with trying to solve problems that our constituents have with the federal government. We have legislative staffs that help us to do whatever our legislative assignments are on whatever committees and subcommittees we serve. But we don't have the ability, none of us as members of Congress, have the ability to be able to monitor each and every one of these agreements and each and every piece of legislation that we vote on. Oh, but that we could. But we knew that there was a rotten apple in the barrel. We knew something was going on. No hearings really, mock hearings they called it on GATT, no real hearings. And you're right, the Mexican elections went by the board, but what happened, unfortunately again, was that immediately after the passage of NAFTA, we saw an uprising in Chiapas. And unfortunately, those people from Mexico, those scholars and those people working on the Mexican side also against NAFTA, told us that this unrest was going to occur. We knew there was going to be a problem in Mexico. It didn't take a week for bloodshed to begin to occur. And we have seen the problem of illegal aliens exacerbated. My own state of Pennsylvania, #1 in the nation with NAFTA trade adjustment assistance applications. So it didn't take long for these things to begin to happen. And I see the gentleman, I would yield now to the gentleman who has really been one of our leaders in the anti-NAFTA movement, Mr. DeFazio, and who really has authored this bill that we're here as proponents of today. It is time, Mr. DeFazio, and I thank you for your leadership. It is time that we pull off the mask, that we stop the charade and say this NAFTA has been a failure. It has been a failure to us as legislators, to the administration, to the American workers, and to the American investors, and even those corporations who have gone down there thinking that they were finding tall green grass and have found out instead there is deep red ink. And I yield to the gentleman.
I think deep red ink would be a polite description of what they're into in Mexico. But when the gentleman said, and I thought this is something, you know, we need this. These issues are so awesome. Talk about the Federal Reserve Board and secret transfers of billions of dollars. Talk about the Treasury extending a line of credit of $9 billion of our dollars. But I think you brought it home, and I'd just like to go back to that point because a lot of people listening don't know what trade adjustment assistance is. What you're telling me is that in your state, more people have lost their jobs and are now unemployed, and have applied for a special federal program set up under this legislation
Paid
because
for
we
by the
knew
taxpayers.
paid for by so when we passed this, we must have anticipated Americans were going to lose their jobs because we set up a special program for people who lost their jobs.
Absolutely.
If I could just interject there, and believe
Well,
me,
yield
it
to the
didn't have $9 billion in it. It had a few millions of dollars to accommodate U.S. workers, and it didn't even have a certain job there at the end of the time when they get their training. Here now we've got a $9 billion taxpayer bailout that we're even aware of, and I'm sure it's more than that when you count the $5 billion that the Federal Reserve is putting into that. It's amazing how quickly our government jumps to the tune of those who have a lot of money, investors and bankers. But when the American worker needed some attention, he and she got no attention in the body of the agreement, and there were pennies put into that program.
And
In
those
fact,
30,000, if the gentlelady would yield further on that point, those 30,000 that have applied, many are lost in the federal red tape. They have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can identify where their job moved to in Mexico. They're all being held up. Only 12,000 have been approved. That means there's 18,000 at least who have applied for the special assistance. And as you point out, of a few $100s a week for people whose job was shipped to Mexico because of a change in U.S. policy, and yet in a snap of a fingers, the Federal Reserve can send billions of dollars with no federal disclosure, and the Treasury can pony up a $9 billion line of credit somehow, but the workers who lost their jobs are still waiting in line at the unemployment office, hoping, begging for a little bit of help so they can get retrained.
you know,
Gentlemen will yield.
I think it's a gentlelady's time, so we should all be
Gentlelady will yield.
asking her
be
for
happy to
time.
yield to the gentleman.
I think one of the questions that we have got to ask ourselves in this whole debate is, who are the forces in America? Who are the groups that pushed us into NAFTA? And the answer is virtually every large multinational corporation. And who are the forces who were opposed to NAFTA and who raised over a year ago many of the same concerns that we are raising right now? Those were the groups who represented American workers. Those were the groups who represented family farmers. Those were the groups who were concerned about the environment. And what about the media? Mr. DeFazio made an interesting point. Ms. Captain made the same point. We're talking about a $9 billion line of credit from the Treasury Department and a line of credit that we don't know from the Federal Reserve. Even in Washington, that is a lot of money. Now, every day you turn on the television and you hear about welfare reform. Well, AFDC, aid to families with dependent children, is $12 billion. A lot of money. It's on the front pages every day. How much public discussion has this untold billions of dollars been receiving on the front pages of the paper? Money which is not going to poor people in America, money which is not going to hungry children in America, money which is going to shore up the peso and perhaps protect American banks which are investing in Mexico. People in Vermont do not call me up and say, Bernie, I want to use my taxpayer dollar to shore up the peso. I don't think I've gotten one call on that issue yet. People are concerned about our deficit. They don't want to spend billions of dollars shoring up the peso. They would like that money to go to retire our deficit. They would like that money to go to feed hungry children, to deal with the homeless. Second point that I want to make on this discussion. After NAFTA was passed, and as everybody in this room knows, it was a tight vote. Both parties were split. The American people were split right down the middle. We checked. We were kind of curious because we were concerned about the nature of reporting that we saw during the NAFTA debate and that I am seeing right now. We checked through every large newspaper in America. New York Times, pro-NAFTA. Wall Street Journal, pro-NAFTA. Boston Globe, Gannett paper, so forth and so on. 17 of the largest papers in America were all pro-NAFTA. We didn't find one that was anti-NAFTA. So I would urge and request that the corporate media pay attention to this issue, maybe admit that they were wrong, and start giving some coverage to the fact that American taxpayers may be on the line for tens of billions of dollars in bailing out the Mexican economy.
With the
I'd like to
gentlelady yield,
reclaim
just on
my-
that point, I have 5 daily newspapers in my district and untold weeklies in every one of those 5 daily newspapers. endorsed NAFTA. And just, you know, just if we can review just a little tiny bit of history, excuse me, I'm from Oregon, and we're famous for Willis Hawley. And everyone who studies economics 101, hears about the disaster of the Great Depression having been caused by the Hawley-Smoot tariffs. Well, if you go back and review history, it's very interesting. Actually, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act was passed 9 months after the crash of the stock market. So it's hard to say that somehow those tariffs triggered the stock market crash or the Great Depression, but they become a convenient whipping boy. And now, if anyone raises reasonable concerns about our trade agreements, the fact that we don't have reciprocity with Japan, the fact that we're giving away sovereignty with GATT, or in the case of the North American Free Trade Agreement, that we are now obligated to prop up the government of Mexico with billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars, you're called a protectionist. I don't call that a protectionist. We're told that this is a national security issue. Yes, it is a national security issue. We're talking about American jobs and American taxpayers' dollars, and we want to protect our national security by revising and rewriting wholesale this agreement, because it is a loser for the people of this country and for the people of Mexico.
If I might reclaim my time just for a second, wouldn't it be interesting to have a meeting, and I would challenge our U.S. Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve. If you've ever been over to the Federal Reserve, they have the largest boardroom meeting table you have ever seen in your life. I don't know where they got the lumber for it, but it is absolutely gigantic. On one side of the table, we have all the claimants who want our taxpayers' money, right? Wouldn't that be great? And on the other side of the table, we have representatives of every single company that is shut down in this country, of the workers that worked in those plants, and they're on the other side of the table. Wouldn't that be a great meeting over at the Fed? Why, they'd have more fun with that, and we'd finally get the American people inside that boardroom, and then we'd take the American people, we'd move them up the street to the Treasury Department, to the big room they have over there with all the chandeliers and all. Wouldn't that be an interesting meeting of all the bankers, the Wall Street investors, the multinationals, the big banks that want loans and money from our taxpayers, putting our taxpayers at risk, and then the very people that they put out of work in the same room? I think it would be one of the most exciting meetings in Washington.
If the gentlelady would yield, I think it's an interesting point that both of the gentlemen make about the newspapers and the coverage on this issue. And I come to this from the standpoint of having been in the news media for 24 years as a reporter myself. And I think it is interesting now, and I made this point at a press conference earlier today, now that these reporters themselves are going to be asked to dig in their own pockets, and their tax dollars are going to be going to Mexico to prop up the peso, maybe all of a sudden there'll be some sort of interest in the fact that this NAFTA agreement is not working as promised. And the other point that was made just a few moments ago is, again, and I think that I've heard no one in my time in Congress that has been a better spokesman on corporate welfare than the distinguished Bernard Sanders from Vermont. And that's exactly what we're talking about. At a time when welfare reform, and we all agree the system is flawed and we need to make some changes to it, but we're talking about all of welfare, 1% of the federal budget, and now we're talking about untold billions of dollars, not only in the corporate welfare that occurs in this country, but now to go offshore to prop up the peso so that this frivolous investment, this get-rich-quick scheme that pursued the signing of the NAFTA agreement can be propped up, and that they won't have to face the consequences that their investments led them, their faulty investments led them. And these are the same people, you know, what we're going to hear is, well, you've got to prop these companies up, because we can't let those people who own stock in those companies be hurt by this, because if not, I mean, these are companies that also provide jobs here in the United States. But the point of the matter is, the reason they're in trouble is because they haven't made their investment here. They have not made their investment in American workers. They've decided to leave us behind, walk offshore, wherever the cheapest labor is, and they got caught, and now they want us to pay to get their fingers out of the cookie jar. I yield back to the...
I want to say something on that to the gentleman. You know, this talk about job training for American workers, I support all kinds of skilling up of the American workforce and our kids in school and vocational programs and after-school programs and college programs. But the point is, if you've got companies taking those jobs someplace else, I don't care how much training you give people, when they're finished with their education, there isn't going to be a good wage job with benefits there for them. And I yield to the gentleman.
I can remember in the floor of this House in my first term 3 years ago, sometime in 2 o'clock in the morning, some $2 billion that some of us had managed to put in the budget in order to feed hungry children and take care of the needs of the millions of kids in this country who are doing without, was taken out of the budget, you see. We couldn't afford $2 billion to take care of hungry children in America. Big debate. What really concerns me is not just that we're putting $9 billion into a line of credit from the Treasury Department, an untold line of credit from the Fed. What really gets me is there's no debate at all on this issue. Now, where are all of those people who ran for election in November, who talked about accountability in government, who talked about the $200 billion deficit, who talked about the balanced budget amendment? Where are they now? I'm listening. I don't hear anything. I guess that when we talk about money for hungry children, when we talk about federal aid for education, affordable housing, we can't afford it. But when it comes to bailing out corporate America, when it comes to shoring up the peso, not only can we afford it, there is no debate, no discussion, not one word on the floor of the House. Now, our honorable new Speaker, very articulate gentleman, very clear about what he believes in. Some of us are eagerly awaiting his words of wisdom on this important issue. Last point on the issue. In this last election, 38% of the American people voted. 62% of the people didn't bother to go to the polls. Tens of millions of people no longer believe that they have a voice in what happens in government, no longer believe that the United States government is here to respond to their needs. They're boycotting American politics and government. And one can understand why people give up on the political process. People working in my state of Vermont 50, 60, 70 hours a week to keep their families afloat. They're paying too much in taxes. And now, without any discussion, you have the government talking about a $9 billion line of credit, and that's why people are giving up on the political process.
If the gentlelady would yield for a moment, I'd just like to go back to a point that came up during the press conference. And I noticed that the gentlelady was a bit beleaguered by a reporter from her district who didn't seem to understand the difference between a net trade balance and shipping a few cars to Mexico. And he would point to the representation of 2.5 cars going to Mexico and say, well, look, that's an increase from 1.5 cars symbolized there going to Mexico. He says that means we sent another 10,000 cars to Mexico. Unfortunately, he was totally ignoring the other side of the ledger, which showed another, I believe it's 200,000 cars coming from Mexico to the United States. So what this means is the United States actually entered into a deficit, a trade deficit with Mexico for the first time in recent history of $81 million in October, and that's just the beginning. We are going to run trade deficits with Mexico. Now, I come from Oregon, and everybody says, Oregon is a free trade state, and by gosh, we benefit from trade. Well, I met with Dr. Charles McMillan, Ph.D., contributor to the Harvard Business Review and scholar, a member of the Clinton transition team, to talk about trade issues yesterday. He said, isn't it interesting? He said, in the GATT debate and the NAFTA debate, we heard how every state is running a surplus and benefits from trade, but somehow the United States of America is running a $160 billion trade deficit. And in fact, he recalculated those numbers and found out that my home state of Oregon is a net loser in trade, as is virtually every other state in the union, and for Mr. Klink's state, big time losses. Thousands of jobs from his state have been shipped overseas in the last year. Now, these are points we have to make, because you will read the headline. It says, Detroit thrilled. They shipped 10,000 more cars to Mexico. It doesn't say Detroit really thrilled. They built 250,000 more cars in Mexico and shipped them here with $1 an hour labor. That's what the headline should be, but the press won't run that headline. They only run the one that comes out of the boardroom.
The gentleman raises such an important point, because those interests in our country, those moneyed interests, only want us to focus on one part of the equation, this part, the products going from America to Mexico.
It's awful small from here. I can hardly see it.
It's very, very small, which are a trickle. And they say, wow, we're sending 20,000 cars. We're doing real well. We didn't send any before. Of course, they're sending them to rental car companies in Cancun and in Mexico City, where Americans can vacation. They never talk about this number, the 277,000 cars and trucks coming the other way. It completely obliterates this, and that's why America's trade advantage with Mexico has been cut in half, and in October went into the red. You have to read the fine print so carefully. It's just like articles in my own local newspaper back home when they talk about wages and they talk about the economy in our area. The last paragraph at the bottom of the page on the insert says, but wages didn't go up. There's job creation, but there's no wage growth. And the reason is because we're cashing out our good jobs with good benefits to the low-wage nations of the world that are largely undemocratic in nature, whether it's China, whether it's Mexico, whether it's many of the nations that repress their workforces and do not, in their laws, provide for the dignity of work. It doesn't surprise me why our wages are going down.
And if you use the other interesting statistic, maybe getting a little esoteric here, is Treasury has two sets of numbers. And that is for goods exported to Mexico that were made in the United States, and then the second is for goods that were transshipped. We have become a point of entry for European goods. They will ship a container to New Orleans, and then they will ship from New Orleans to Mexico to avoid the customs on and tariff on European goods. And they add that into our balance of trade. Maybe one dock worker checked that container for 1 or 2 minutes of his or her day, but that was the total American contribution to that effort. But that counts as part of our exports to Mexico. It's, you know, it's a transshipment. I mean, it's amazing the lengths to which our government has gone to try, and even when they get all done with that, they still had to show a deficit in October, and that was before we got to the devaluation. And does any American believe, or do any of those mucky-mucks really believe, that we can go on year in, year out running a trade deficit with the rest of the world of $120, $140, $160 billion, and someday the piper won't come due? We're not only exporting those jobs this year by running those trade deficits. Someday, someone's going to ask us to cough up those dollars that we're shipping overseas. We have more than $1 trillion of federal debt now. From 1917 until 1984, the United States government was the largest creditor in the world. And now we are the largest debtor in the world. We owe more money to the rest of the world than all of those problem nations combined. Add them up, Brazil, Mexico, everybody else. Our trade debt is greater than every other nation in the world combined.
And if the gentleman will yield, I think that is why the Federal Reserve has been hiking interest rates in this country and taking it out of the hides of our people, not because inflation is a major issue in this country, not because our people's wages are going up, because in fact they're not, except for those at the very, very top. But I think that's why the Fed is raising interest rates, because they're having to monetize the traded goods sector. And we've held these huge deficits with the rest of the world. I think with China will be over $40 billion more of Chinese goods coming into this country than U.S. goods going over there this year. With Japan, it will be a similar number. For the last 15 years, we haven't had any kind of a trade balance with Japan. I don't think we've ever had one, in fact. Now with Mexico, the advantage we had is just disappearing overnight. So I think that's why interest rates are really going up in this country. I yield to the gentleman.
The absurdities pile on top of the absurdities. Not only is everything that you're saying true, in my opinion, but on top of that, we are spending tens and tens of billions of dollars to defend Asia, against whom I am not exactly sure. Some years ago, we were told that it was necessary to spend huge amounts of money defending freedom against the communist Chinese dictatorship. Well, surprise, surprise, last I read, the Chinese communist dictatorship still exists. But now they're okay because they are, for the first time, and have been for a number of years, welcoming tens of billions of dollars of American corporate investment. So we are spending huge amounts of money defending somebody in Asia, I'm not exactly sure, against a country which now welcomes American corporate investment. And in fact, many of the corporations like China, because it's very difficult for the Chinese workers to stand up and defend their own rights. So the absurdity piles on top of the absurdity.
Well, the gentleman yield,
Sure.
you know, last week we had the swearing in of members of Congress, and there was a performance in the afternoon by a group called the Power Rangers, which is a very popular toy that is now, they have these animated shows that they take around the country and around the world. And most Americans don't realize that that particular toy, which sold over $300 million worth in our marketplace last year, there isn't a single one made in this country. And in fact, the Power Rangers is owned by Bandai Corporation, which is a Tokyo-based company. They employ about 700 people in Tokyo only in marketing. They employ all their workers in Asia, especially in China and Thailand, and they pay them nothing. They then take those low-wage produced goods and they sell them over here from $29 all the way up. There's some $5.99 figurines, but if you go into your local toy store, which I did, and I turned over every toy that was there, they were all produced in China, they were produced in Thailand, and somebody's making the money off of the outsourcing of production by these big multinationals, whether it's Bandai or Mattel, which is located in our country. And most young girls don't know that there isn't a single Barbie doll made in America. Mattel has outsourced all of its production, and yet the children, these companies, look upon our children not as children, but as a market. And they buy time on all these television shows and all of the rest, and none of our workers are working, yet parents and grandparents go to the store, they want to buy that for their child or their grandchild, and they pay top dollar, $29 all the way up to $200.
Gentle-A would yield on that, because this is a point that occasionally a constituent brings up with me, and they say, well, look, you know, if we didn't have this free trade agreement with Mexico, consumers would suffer. Now I said, no, wait a minute, do you think that Chrysler, which is building a large new Dodge Ram plant, a truck that sells for a minimum, I think, of $15,000. Some of them sell for as much as $30,000. I said, do you think Mexicans, with their former average earnings of $1,700 a year, this week reduced to about $800 or $900, are going to be buying very many of the Dodge Rams which they build? And they say, well, no. And I said, have you noticed that since Chrysler or other U.S. firms started building these trucks in Mexico, that the price has come down? No. Have you noticed that the profits have gone up, but the price hasn't come down? Well, now that you say that, yeah, I guess I did notice they had their most profitable quarter ever. I say, that's the point. Even if you can argue that, you know, we should produce goods overseas because we can exploit cheap labor and it will be beneficial to the American consumer, the bottom line is that doesn't happen. The prices don't go down, the profits go up. Nike Corporation, based in Portland, Oregon, they don't make anything in America anymore. They used to manufacture shoes here.
If the gentleman would yield, I read that Nike, it cost them $8 to make a pair of sneakers in China. They have some white-collar workers up there in Oregon that are marketing people, just like the Bandai Corporation in Tokyo with Power Rangers. It costs them $8 because they pay their workers 10 cents an hour in places that you and I have never been in China. The American public doesn't see it. They ship the shoes over here, and we're charged $69.99 all the way up to $150. But they pay Charles Barkley $20 million to make us all feel good through advertising when we buy those shoes. And there are very, very few shoe manufacturing companies. Most of those were located in the Congressman Sanders region of the country. Very few shoe manufacturing companies left in this country. So our people are really being put over a barrel. And you're right, prices don't go down, but corporate profits go up, prices go up, and our wages are coming down. And there's some pretty significant reasons for it.
Would the gentlelady yield on that point?
I
I had the distinct honor last year to chair a hearing in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. There was a company by the name of Leslie Fay. This gets us back to NAFTA, because you understand that at a time when we're being asked to prop up the peso, the administration and others are taking a look at how can we expand this NAFTA agreement to Central America and to South America. This hearing was because the Leslie Fay Company wanted to pull out thousands of jobs from Wilkes-Barre, garment workers, and they wanted to take these jobs down to Central America. And we had 2 blouses there. One was made in Central America, and it was a $50 blouse, and the workers were paid 35 cents an hour. The other one was made by Leslie Fay workers in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and it cost $48, and the workers were paid, of course, over minimum wage for certain. So there is no savings. There is no savings on this. I yield back my time to the gentleman.
I believe that our time has expired, and I just wanted to thank the gentleman here, Congressman Sanders of Vermont, Congressman Klink of Pennsylvania, and Congressman DeFazio of Oregon for their leadership and speaking up for the people of the United States and the people of the continent and the people of the world, not just those investors and large multinational corporations who have access to the media and to our own financial centers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlelady.
Gentlelady's expired. Are there any announcements?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the following members be permitted to extend their remarks and to include extraneous material in that section of the record entitled Extension of Remarks. Mr. Quinn, Mr. Gilman in 2 instances, Mr. McCollum, Mr. Kim, Mr. Orton in 2 instances, Mr. Cardin, Mrs. Maloney, Ms. Capter, Mr. McCollum, Mr. Lipinski, Mr. Gephardt, Mr. Forbes, Mrs. Johnson of Connecticut, Mr. Hoke, Mr. Gallagly, Mr. Schuster, Mr. Duncan, Mr. Frank of Massachusetts, Mrs. Eshoo, Mr. Upton, Mr. Filner, and Mr. Stark.
Without objection, so ordered. Does the lady have a motion?
I move that the House do now adjourn.